The original concept of history, mystery, and the unexplained, long before YouTube or podcasting, was history, mystery, and the unexplained of Northern Illinois. It was going to be a book series on the strange and unusual history of Illinois' northern 33 counties. I have more than 20 years worth of research on this topic, and today I'd like to share a few of those tales with you. But before we get started, welcome to History, Mystery, and the Unexplained, the show where we look at everything from true crime to cryptids, the paranormal, and beyond. Please like, subscribe, follow, or whatever on the platform of your choice. And be sure to give us a review. I'd love to hear what you think. The Mary Building, built by Captain Charles Hamilton Mary in 1867, is filled with more mystery and legend than perhaps any other place in the history of East Dubuque. From the woman in black seen repeatedly in the upstairs bedroom and the dining room, to the shackles hanging from the walls in the basement, to the tunnels beneath the building. It is a place of intrigue, stories, and speculation. And Captain Mary was more than just a ferry boat owner. He was an entrepreneur who monopolized the transportation of people across the Mississippi River at one of the most important ports in the region at the time. The building, erected at 399 Sinsinawa Avenue, served as a place for parties, a place to show off his extravagant luxury, and a place for things only whispered about in the shadows. Among the many mysteries of this historic building, now a bed and breakfast, is the building's limestone tunnel leading out from the basement. Some say at one time it ran as far underground as the banks of the Mississippi River, and was used by Mary's men to smuggle goods away from the captain's guests as he entertained them through the night. Still others claim a more noble use for this tunnel, suggesting that the house, as the Mary Building was called in its day, was a stop along the Underground Railroad. Slaves fleeing north could gain a night's respite in the sanctity of the basement by means of protection of the tunnels. But what of the shackles lining the walls? A way to secure travelers' livestock while they awaited safe passage to the Iowa side of the mighty river, or a place to hold slaves being sold back to the south. Yes, there are some legends that suggest still another view of these damn tunnels, another side to the captain. Was he an aid to the cause of freedom or a southern lover on northern soil? Well, again, the house was built in 1867, a full 2 years after the Civil War, which means slavery was already abolished. Still, those shackles are the size and shape of a human wrist. So if not slaves, then whose? At some time in history, it is suggested that the building was used as a temporary jailhouse. Sorting out the mysteries of the Captain Mary Building has been an ongoing project of the current owners, and I am not foolish enough to think that I can unravel it entirely today. Perhaps the lack of evidence that perpetuates the mystery is the allure of such legends. Without the mystery, it would just be another home, another aging building beyond its prime. As for Mary himself, he was put out of business by the construction of a bridge. In 1879, a foot and wagon bridge eliminated the need for the ferry service. The captain disappeared from the public record and perhaps even from East Dubuque entirely shortly after its construction, leaving the house to his wife. As time passed, the Mary Mansion fell to disuse and begun to succumb to the elements. This stately home that once held parties for such guests as Abraham Lincoln was left as just another abandoned manor that had outlived its use in a changing city. For almost a century, little is known of the building's various tenants. However, it's certain that at a time in the 20s, like so many other places in East Dubuque, it found use as a speakeasy. When it was renovated in 2001, old craps tables were found stowed away in the basement. Many even claim that Al Capone himself had ties to the Mary Building. Now, I realize that one would be hard-pressed to find a city or town in northern Illinois that doesn't claim this. But there is some evidence, loose as it may be, to suggest that it was plausible. The Julian Inn in Dubuque, Iowa, may have actually been owned by the famed mobster, and the surrounding area was said to be his hideout when things got too hot in Chicago. The inn was used as a lookout with a perfect vantage point of the bridge. Capone's men would be able to see a raid coming well in advance, allowing him time to make a getaway from an underground garage said to have existed nearby. On the Illinois side of the river, the Mary Building likewise sits exactly opposite the bridge with an excellent view from its cupola. For a bit more concrete evidence of Capone's presence in East Dubuque, or at least the presence of his men, we can turn to a 1926 article from the Chicago Daily Tribune titled, "Chicago Gunmen Carry War to Dubuque, One Dead." It reads like the pages of a dime novel. Mike Bon Bon Algretti knelt on the floor of the Bon Bon Cafe in an East Dubuque suburb. Jack Shea stood behind him, twin automatics in his hand. Shea toyed with the helpless Algretti, repeatedly calling him a dead man and requesting that he say his prayers. After 10 minutes of banter between the two hardened gangsters, Shea began to count to 3. 1. Sweat dripped down Algretti's brow. 2. Algretti asked for the Lord's forgiveness, playing each sin over in his mind. 3. The gun clicked. No bang. With all the fun Shea was having, making the moment a memorable one, he'd forgotten to take the safety off the gun. Algretti leapt behind the bar, grabbing his own revolver. Both men fired, but it was Bon Bon's bullets that made their mark. Mike Algretti was the cousin of Al Capone, returned to the pages of the Tribune several times in 1931 and 1932 for his role as the manager of Ralph Capone's Cotton Club in Cicero, as well as the allegations of being a pimp who regularly brought women from his brothel to Al Capone in prison. It was incidents like these that led to the nickname of the area around East Dubuque being called Little Cicero. Can we say for certain that Capone gamed and drank at the Mary Building? No. But the allure of the mystery is what makes such legends so intriguing. Turner Hall begun its construction in 1874 with much fanfare. As the reporter of the Galena Weekly Gazette put it, the day broke on a city alive with strangers from the surrounding villages. A parade marched down Main Street, winding across the town and coming to rest on Bench Street, where the excited crowd listened to Frederick Stahl, president of the day, give a speech that said it all. Our city needs a public hall of sufficient capacity to accommodate a large audience, both for the purpose of amusement and instruction. This building, which is now being erected, appears to be well suited to meet the present and future wants of our city. It will present no stately columns, no beautiful statuary, no lofty dome to attract the wonder and admiration of the beholder, but it will be simple in style, durable in structure, simple in its dimensions, and in harmony with the means and wants of the community. May I not add that when finished, it will present to the mind a fitting emblem of the character of the sturdy men who are now engaged in its erection. As Stahl finished speaking those words, a hermetically sealed zinc box was put into the point of the cornerstone. As Stahl finished speaking those words, a hermetically sealed zinc box was put at the point of the cornerstone. True to the words spoken that first day, the hall went on to host many great events, including masquerade balls, traveling shows, and lectures from the finest speakers, including at least 2 future presidents, Theodore Roosevelt and William McKinley. At some point between 1900 and 1910, the Turner Hall changed ownership along with its name. It was sold to a stock company known as the Turner Opera House Association, and appropriately named the Turner Opera House. In terms of the hall's purpose, little seemed to change. It was still host to theatrical events, musicals, and banquets. A second event occurred in 1910, however, that may be the cause of the hall's current ghostly presence. Charles Shearer, Turner Society treasurer, hall business manager, and third-term mayor of Galena, dropped out of a heart attack inside the building. Many believe his spirit still haunts the place to this day. How much can be credited entirely to him is hard to say because the hall's history doesn't end there. During The next transition, another tragedy hit. In 1926, the hall was sold again, this time to the Fraternal Order of the Eagles. Within a few months after the sale, flames gutted the hall. On July 1st, 1926, the alarm bell sounded just a little too late. The cause of the fire was never officially determined. Some believed lightning had caused it, others faulty wiring. The most outlandish theory, that a bird had carried a lit cigarette into the building. Whatever the case, the theater was ruined. Citizens pulled together, donating money to help aid in the reconstruction. And reconstruct they did. By 1927, a new hall was already completed, opening on January 10th. This time, they ignored the words spoken by Frederick Stahl on the day of the cornerstone about stately columns and beautiful stationery. The new hall boasted, among other features, marble floors and an enlarged stage. It billed itself as a dreamland of an opera house. Despite the glorious return, like so many other theaters of the time, its audience went into decline. By the late 30s and early 40s, it was sold to the city, already showing signs of neglect and decay, caused by years of empty houses. The hall continued to crumble for 3 more decades before the Galena Art Theater, formed in 1960, created the Save Turner Hall Fund. Today, Turner Hall is rented out for weddings, plays, concerts, and special events. You can see its fully restored beauty and perhaps even catch a glimpse of its ghost. For the most part, the ghost of Turner Hall is thought of as little more than a friendly prankster, turning on and off lights, toying with set designers, and generally just letting its presence be known. Apparitions have been seen near the dressing room and in the attic of the historic building. 2 incidents, however, seem to suggest a more sinister spirit. The first occurred when 2 men were setting up a projector for use in a slideshow presentation. While they were working, they heard an unintelligible, angry shouting coming from somewhere within the hall. The men stopped abruptly and looked around in vain to find the source of it. Finding nothing, they returned to work. Almost immediately upon returning, the shouting was heard again. This time, the men did not investigate. Frightened, they packed up and left. The second incident was even more chilling. This one was a matter of life and death. 2 individuals working on the Save the Turner Hall Fund were inspecting the building when a cold blast of air came over them. They rushed to the other side of the room just as a loose brick fell in the exact spot they were standing. Friendly or angry, one or many, it seems certain that something of the past still lurks in Turner Hall. Now, Galena, Illinois is a city full of ghost stories. Several books have been written about the area as paranormal, and there are numerous ghost tours in the area. As such, I want to share one more tale from Galena's history before we move on. Before we begin this tale, however, I do want to give a trigger warning, as it does include domestic abuse. I've included timestamps in the show notes if you wish to skip ahead to the final story. The first noteworthy criminal trial in Galena's history, and the only one to result in a conviction of a death penalty in all of Joe Davis County, occurred in late October of 1854. As the story goes, John Taylor lived with his wife in the upper floor of a rundown home in Galena's Old Town. In the lower portion of the home was a gentleman named Rosenberg. One night after a bout of drinking, Mr. Taylor stumbled back to his house and begun to argue with his wife. He had discovered that Miss Taylor was having an affair with the gentleman downstairs. That things got heated, and the argument, by some reports, turned to abuse. It was at this point that Rosenberg, hearing the commotion, came in to his lover's aid. At the sight of the man that started it, Taylor grabbed his gun and took a swing at Rosenberg. His wife stepped between them, trying to quell the dispute, and was struck in the side of the head. The blow from the steel of her husband's shotgun crushed her skull instantly. In short order, a jury of John Taylor's peers found him guilty of murder, and Judge Ben R. Sheldon ordered the punishment of death by hanging. To his dying moment, however, Mr. Taylor swore his innocence. On January 19th, 1855, as Mr. Taylor stood on the gallows, noose around his neck, he addressed the thousands who had come to bear witness. For over 30 minutes, he spoke of the innocence of Jesus and the Lord's forgiveness for whatever sins he may bear, sins that did not include murder. It is also noted that sometime later, as an aged Rosenberg lay on his deathbed, he confessed to the murder of Miss Taylor. Rosenberg was the only other soul present on the day of Miss Taylor's demise, and it was his own words on the stand and Mr. Taylor's trial that led to the quick and decisive verdict. Now, depending on which version of this moment in history we examine, the reason behind Sheriff W.R. Rowley's choice of location to carry out the punishment are varied. By some accounts, it was simply a matter of finding an adequate amount of room for the vast number of spectators who had shown interest in seeing the man put to death. Other claims say that it was due to the pleas of the citizens of Galena that a man be executed somewhere outside of town. As this claim goes, the citizens feared John Taylor's soul would return after death and haunt the grounds where he was hanged. Whichever reason the location chosen was the grounds of the Joe Davis County Poorhouse and Insane Asylum outside the city limits. This area on North Irish Hollow Road is still a stop on many ghost tours. The farm itself was torn down in 2005, but many have seen orbs floating throughout the many acres where the poor farm once stood. Whether it's the ghost of John Taylor or not is debatable. For those not familiar with these poorhouses in the history of America, they were places to provide shelter both to the less fortunate citizens of the area and to those suffering from mental illness. As families moved westward, those who couldn't make the journey were often just left behind. With no family around to provide support, the job fell to the city. Most of the mentally ill were just confined in cells and often received little to no care. These poorhouses were known for overcrowding and less than favorable conditions. Many lived out their final days on the same ground where John Taylor was hung. It is not surprising that legends exist about a good number of these sites throughout the country. For several years, an Italian restaurant used some of the buildings from the poorhouse. The restaurant was reputedly haunted by more than a few spirits, and some say that these spirits even followed them to their new location in downtown Galena. Although not a ghost story like the others shared today, I want to share the legends and folklore of one more town before we wrap up. The very foundations of the early settlement of the town of Elizabeth, Illinois, are seated in legend. As the story goes, A.P. von Matter had journeyed a great distance in search of land where he could settle down. He had heard the stories of the rich lead ore in the mines of Galena and wanted his own land to work. Tired and alone, he forged through the dense forests of the untamed wilderness, searching for some sign of great treasure that he sought. It was then that it happened. Nearing the point of exhaustion, von Matter's eyes fell upon a beautiful young native girl stepping out from behind the trees. She asked him what it was that he was after, and he told her that he was searching for a mine. She decided to barter a deal. The Native American asked for A.P. von Matter's hand in marriage in exchange for knowledge of the location of a vast mine. Van Matter agreed, and they were wed soon after. He then followed his new bride to the shores of the Apple River, where he set up the first white mine, smelting furnace, and home known to exist in the area of Elizabeth. Although Elizabeth did not see the rapid expansion of Galena or East Dubuque in the years that followed, it did grow. The 2 years following Van Matter's settlement saw the arrival of miners, farmers, and trappers, all looking to make the lands along the Apple River their home. With these men came the many Elizabeths who have been credited with the origin of the town name. These were brave frontier women, each worthy of such an honor for their own reasons. During the Black Hawk War, more than 40 people called the area around Elizabeth home. Unlike so many of the surrounding communities, The people along the Apple River did not flee to the safety of the Galena fort. When the war began, instead, they quickly built a fort of their own to protect themselves from the threat of attack. In less than a week, the settlers managed to erect a fort covering 1,000 square feet with 2-story blockhouse and rough sleeping quarters. It was a good thing they did, because on May 22nd, 1832, the Apple River Fort was attacked by Black Hawk and at least 200 of his British band of warriors. Even though there were only 22 men and 23 women at the Apple River Fort, they were able to defend themselves against the incoming army. Much of this victory is credited to Elizabeth Armstrong and the women of the Apple River Fort. Reports vary on the exact details of Miss Armstrong's actions during the battle, but by most accounts, she rallied up the women to load guns and retrieve ammo to allow the men the ability to keep a steady stream of bullets volleying toward the attacking Native Americans. In Past and Present, Elizabeth, Illinois Centennial, published in 1968, it recounts the tale of how Elizabeth Armstrong grabbed up the rifle of G.W. Herculoid when he fell in battle and prepared to take his place on the wall, returning fire. In this telling, it was Sam Hughlett who advised her to load the guns instead, leaving her to rally the women to join. Regardless of whether it was her own idea or Mr. Hughlett, it is said that until she took charge, the women and children of the fort were cowering in fear. In the various tellings of the 45-minute battle that occurred that day, Miss Armstrong is also credited for finding a man in a flour barrel and ordering him to return to the wall, and for cursing and swearing like a pirate so loudly that she barked orders the attacking Native Americans could hear her over the gunfire. It is these tales and this Elizabeth that most historians suggest is the reason for the naming of the town. Although the details of the story are missing, in most accounts it is suggested that another viable Elizabeth is Elizabeth von Vogsberg, who is said to have slipped away from the fort during the battle and retrieve more ammo for the town. This story is true. Her bravery is truly admirable and deserving of such an honor to have a town named after her. The final Elizabeth of note doesn't have the same flair as the other stories. This is Elizabeth Winters, who is the wife of John Winters. At the time the town was officially named, Winters owned the majority of land on which Elizabeth, Illinois, now resides. Thus, John named it after his wife. Today, the fort is long gone, but a replica was constructed at Apple River Fort State Park if anyone wants to pretend to be Elizabeth Armstrong and shout curses at the battlefield. That's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed these stories. Till next time, I'm Christopher Damian. This is History, Mystery, and Unexplained, and thank you for listening.